Greetings from Space Center Houston. My name is Daniel Newmeyer. I'm the Vice President of Education, and I'm very excited to welcome you to our first virtual visit with an astronaut. In this interactive session, you will have an opportunity to submit questions during the Q&A session of the program. Space Center Houston strives to create a community of problem solvers and fuel the STEM pathway to advance a science and engineering literate community and society. We are the official visitor center for NASA Johnson Space Center. We feature over 400 artifacts that interpret the past, present, and future of space exploration. We are a dynamic learning destination, and we look forward to welcoming you back into our doors in the very near future. But meanwhile, we are excited to offer this extraordinary program to Space Center Houston's national network of educators and their students. We are very proud of how educators across the nation have adapted to these challenging times. After the program, please explore our blog, which can be found on the front page of spacecenter.org, where you can gain access to exciting space exploration content and our previous Thought Leader series to use with your students. Please stay connected with us as we explore new ways to support you through these challenging times. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Leroy Chiao, a regular at Space Center Houston as an Astronaut Friday speaker. Dr. Leroy Chiao is a former NASA astronaut, an International Space Station commander. He has logged over 229 days in space on 4 space missions, including 6 spacewalks supporting the ISS design and construction. Educated as a chemical engineer, he has held positions and leadership positions in technology companies, startups. He's also a champion of STEM education and supports teachers and students all around the world. Welcome, Dr. Chiao.
Well, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Daniel. It's a real pleasure to be here virtually with everyone. And thank you to the educators who are online right now. I know I've met several of you, I'm sure. And so, you all know that I'm an astronaut and that I was at NASA for 15 years. And I did get the chance to fly 4 missions into space, 3 aboard space shuttles. And on my 4th flight, trained with the Russians and launched to the ISS aboard a Russian Soyuz, where I served as the commander and NASA science officer for 6.5 months during Expedition 10. Well, you probably also know my business partner, Jamie Sunkle, and we started One Orbit together just a few years ago, and we've probably been to some of your schools, and we're very pleased to be partnering with Space Center Houston, and what we want to do is give you a little taste and get your feedback of what we're going to be developing here, a virtual astronaut visit, including the first part will be kind of my story, tell my story and talk about NASA. And then the second part, I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation we're all in here and draw some parallels to living in space. So I've always been fascinated by space and rockets and airplanes, and I can't remember a time when I wasn't building models and launching model rockets and things like that. But it really was the Apollo moon missions which captured my imagination and made me start to dream about wanting to become an astronaut myself. And as you know, we just passed the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, and I'm going to show you just a quick little video that NASA put together. And I never get tired of watching this, so I hope you don't too. If we go ahead and play the video, please.
At 15 seconds, guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. We have a liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds forward, drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're pretty busy.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon. On this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful, clearly. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here. Beautiful, beautiful. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation.
Tranquility Base, unit guidance recommendation is pinged, and you're cleared for takeoff.
Roger, understand. We're number 1 on the runway. 7, 6, 5, engine arm active. Beautiful. Very smooth. Very quiet ride.
Apollo 11, this is Hornet, over.
Apollo 11, this is Apollo 11, reading a loud and clear. Our position 1330.
Wow, hard to believe that was 50 years ago. And so I did go to university, of course. I studied chemical engineering. I have 3 degrees in chemical engineering. And then I did apply to NASA, and you can see I did get selected some time ago. I guess we're coming up on, gosh, almost 30 years and 20 pounds ago. But had a wonderful career at NASA. Next slide, please. 4 years after arriving, I did get my first chance to fly aboard Space Shuttle Columbia, and you can imagine after having worked so hard and dreamed about it for so long and jumping through those hoops, and after a few lucky breaks, I did actually get to that point of getting aboard the spacecraft for the first time. You can imagine it was a very special time. And it was, by coincidence, we flew on the 25th anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission. In fact, our 2-week mission bookended the entire Apollo 11 mission, so that was kind of neat. And we also flew aboard the namesake of the command module of Apollo 11, which was Columbia. Next slide, please. So during my missions in space, I did get to do a lot of different kind of work. I got to do research work, of course. Next slide. And as you heard Daniel mention, I did get the chance to do 6 spacewalks, 4 of them in American spacesuits. And next slide. And 2 of them in Russian spacesuits. And so that was really a neat thing. We were all working in first to help with the design of the ISS, and then later to actually go outside and use tools to help build the ISS. Next slide, please. Finally, I got to go aboard the International Space Station and stay up there for a long duration flight. And, you know, that was really a neat experience. It was 3.5 years of training. Next slide. And about half of that time was spent training with the Russians. We were, of course, Russia's the other major partner in the ISS program. And so I trained with them. Next slide. And got to go fly aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft. A very, very different experience flying aboard a Soyuz as opposed to a space shuttle. And, you know, space shuttle, frankly, is a lot more comfortable, but Soyuz is a very, very reliable spacecraft. Next slide. Well, space is a really a life-changing experience, as you can imagine. I don't think anyone flies into space without some pretty serious introspection and looking out into the universe and thinking about what it all means and what it's all about. Our favorite thing to do, of course, aboard ISS and anytime you're in space is to take photographs of the Earth. So I'd like to share a few with you. Next slide. So this is New York City, Manhattan. And, you know, this is all handheld photography, but you can see with clear weather and a little practice, you can get pretty good. Next slide. Here's the southern tip of Florida, one of the most beautiful parts of the world, South Florida and the Bahamas. The blues and greens are unlike anywhere else in the world, and they just kind of jump out at you. Next slide. These are glaciers in Patagonia, really quite striking to see structures like this as well. Next slide. You can see a lot of man-made items, including the Great Pyramids here. You can see the 2 in the center pretty clearly, and if you look down from the 2 big ones, you can make out the 3rd smaller one. If you look to the left of the smaller one, you can make out the outline of the Sphinx. Next slide. This is Lake Nasser in Sunglint. This was a neat photograph The sunlight was reflecting just about right off the surface of the water at the right angle, where it reflected into the camera lens, and this is what it really looked like out the window just for a moment, and I was able to capture it. Next slide. You all know there's been a pivot back to the moon, and I absolutely think this is the right thing to do, and hopefully we can get there sooner rather than later. Next slide. And then from there, go on to Mars. And I always like, when I talk to students, I always like to remind them, hey, you know what, think about this. One of you here in the audience today, you might be the first person on Mars, and I think that would be really cool. Next slide. So there's been something going on recently called the Great Rocket Race. Companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, coming hopefully pretty soon, have really upended the launch market by reducing the cost of flying into space. Next slide. So a lot of different rockets being developed. The incumbent, the big aerospace companies that were building rockets that basically had a monopoly on U.S. launches, military and NASA launches, were saying that they couldn't build cheaper rockets until SpaceX came in and did it, started recovering first stage boosters on a regular basis and reusing them. And they've got other developments and plans as well. Blue Origin, of course, is going to be doing a lot of the same things. And so the cost of launching a satellite has come way, way down, and it's going to get down even further. This is good old American competition, because the incumbents, United Launch Alliance, who said it couldn't be done, they're now working on their Vulcan rocket, which is going to be designed to be a low-cost launcher. Next slide, please. So SpaceX, of course, wants to go to Mars, and this is very exciting because it opens up the possibility of a commercial and government collaboration partnership, leveraging off, of course, NASA's many, many years of operational know-how and technology, and then leveraging off of the nimbleness of a small commercial outfit like SpaceX or Blue Origin and their capabilities to move quickly. Next slide. So just a little over a year ago, SpaceX did launch their Falcon Heavy, and that was really exciting because this was the largest rocket that had launched since the Saturn moon rockets. And if you look at this this picture here, you can see it's got 3 core stages, the center core and then two on the side. And the neat thing about this is the 2 on the side were Falcon 9 first stages that had flown previously and launched satellites and then came back and landed and were refurbished for reuse. Next slide. And here are those 2 refurbished boosters coming back to the Cape, flying back in formation, landing in formation on their landing pads. Perfect. Next slide. Usually when you launch a new rocket, you fill the payload. The payload is water. And that's because if you have a problem and the rocket explodes, you just spray water everywhere. It's not too big of a deal. But Elon Musk, in classic fashion, he launched his Tesla Roadster and put a spacesuited mannequin crash test dummy in the driver's seat, launched into a highly elliptical orbit. In fact, came close to Mars at the end of I think last year. And it will basically stay in orbit indefinitely, probably for at least millions of years until something happens to it. Next slide. Of course, not sitting still, Elon Musk and SpaceX is working on their next generation spacecraft they're calling Starship and the booster Falcon Super Heavy. Next slide. They've got a Japanese billionaire that has invested an undisclosed sum of money, but people have estimated it's probably getting close to about $1 billion to help get this program going. And so for his troubles, he's going to get to take 15 of his closest friends around the moon on the first flight of the Starship with people on board. Next slide. So this is what Elon Musk thinks that it'll look like, his Mars base. So you can see his starships land on their tail fins, very much like the old 1950s, 1960s science fiction movies. Pretty cool to think about. I'm not sure exactly how he's gonna get there to do that, but I sure hope he does. I'm glad he wants to go to Mars. Then I want to do a little bit of a segue, and from this point, so that gives you kind of an idea of what the virtual astronaut program is going to look like. And then what I want to talk about is a little bit about the situation we're all in, and to draw some parallels between it and long duration spaceflight, right? And so the biggest difference, of course, well, the similarities is we're all now adapting or have adapted to using technology, having meetings virtually like this, using the phone more, and not getting together in groups together, right? And so that's very much like we operate aboard the space station. Of course, we're remote. There aren't very many people around us, and we use, of course, radio contact as well as video conferencing capabilities, things like that. The biggest difference is that this developed very, very quickly for us, this situation. I mean, just seemingly in a matter of days or just even a few weeks, suddenly, non-essential businesses were closed, people weren't supposed to go to work, and we, had that thrust upon us. Training for a space station mission, I had 3.5 years to prepare for that, right? I knew what was coming. I had a lot of time to think about it and kind of prepare myself mentally for it. And so that's one of the big differences. And what's important, what we have to do is we have to set our expectations. And what you don't want to do is set a false expectation like, what, by the end of May, I think this will be over, or by the end of June, I think this will be over. It might be, we hope it is, but it might not. And so what happens if you set those false deadlines is if those deadlines come and go, then you can't help but be disappointed, and then you could get depressed, and that leads to demotivation. So really, you want to stay motivated, you want to stay positive, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of those coping strategies. But basically, accept where we are. We're in this weird situation. Uncertainty, that's the other big difference, is when I was aboard the space station, I knew when I was coming down. I knew it could get delayed for a few days or a few weeks, but I knew pretty much when I was coming down. We don't know when this is going to end. And what humans hate the most, absolutely hate the most, is uncertainty. We really don't like it. We would prefer to have bad news than uncertainty, because with bad news, you can at least start making a plan and then executing how you're going to try to come out of that, right? So that's what we're faced with here. And so, what we really need to do is manage those expectations, keep going, keep motivated, help each other. It was very important aboard the station to stay in touch with my people I was close to, that I am close to, my family and my friends. And we had the same mediums. We had email, we had voice over IP phone. We could make short phone calls down to the ground when the antenna was pointed at the satellite. And we had some organized video conferences as well. And so, you want to kind of keep doing that, keep in touch with people. I really enjoyed sending photographs to people, places around the earth that I had taken photographs of that meant something to these people, sending it out to them, and they'd send me photographs from home in return, and that was really nice. But it's important to keep that up, because you can get to a point where if you get frustrated or you get kind of demotivated, and you can get into a funk and you just spiral down, you stop keeping in touch with people, and then that just spirals down even more, and that's where you really get demotivated and don't feel like doing anything, and that's when a lot of other problems start, right? So another thing I really love to do here in our situation that we didn't get to do aboard the space station is we got to go outside, right? Right now, we can still go outside and exercise. I can still go for my morning run. I can still take my dogs for walks. That really helps to boost me up. That's the biggest thing I missed when I was aboard the space station was nature. Besides my family and friends, I just missed feeling wind, feeling wind on my face, smelling the grass, hearing birds and watching squirrels run around. That really helps to lift my spirits. And so, figure out what works for you, and that'll help you to stay motivated. So that's a little bit of a taste of one of our programs that One Orbit that we've developed, and we're working in partnership with the Space Center Houston to continue developing. And so with what you saw today was a little bit about the virtual astronaut program, and then one of our special programs that we're going to be dealing with our current situation. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions, and I'm going to go ahead and click over to the Q&A part, and I'll just kind of go down and answer questions that you guys have typed in. So let's see, the first one I've got here, let's see, from MH. Are the people in the space station stuck there till this is over because things aren't being launched to go get them? No, actually, just a few days ago, we did launch. Russians did launch a Soyuz spacecraft with American Chris Cassidy on board and 2 Russian crewmates. So they're at the space station, and they will, there was another crew that will be preparing to come back down. Or actually, no, they did just come back down before this other crew launched. But no, we are going to continue the rotation. So the increments will still kind of be in that 6-month-ish kind of schedule. from Peyton, is it fun in space? And also, how are spacesuits made? It is fun in space. And so there's a lot of hard work involved, and your schedule is set to the minute, if you can believe it. But it's still a lot of fun. And so we get to go up and do all these things, all this work. But then we have some free time too. We can look out the window, take photographs, do some what we call the gymnastics, which are a lot easier to do in space. I certainly wouldn't try some of those things on the Earth. Still amazes me that people can. All right, let's see. What else do we have here? We've got Sienna. How would you compare your physical impacts and your mental impacts from your ISS space missions? Yeah, so shuttle missions were very short. Shuttle missions were only 1 or 2 weeks in duration. So it's almost like a sprint. We would get back from it. We'd train for a year and a half for a shuttle mission, come back from a 2-week mission and say, wow, it's over. Did I really do that? Or was it like a dream, And so it's kind of funny. But space station missions, on the other hand, are kind of more of a marathon, compared to a sprint. And so, like I said, you got to set your expectations that you're going to be up there for a while. You get into a routine, get into a working routine, and like I said, all the coping skills and the mechanisms that help you kind of get through that. But it's also very rewarding to do that kind of work. Okay, from Capcom Conrad, what is the biggest difference between a spacewalk with a Russian spacesuit versus an American spacesuit? Yeah, so the spacesuits it's kind of interesting because they both get you outside. They both allow you to work outside in space, but they're very different, right? And so it's kind of like two different kinds of cars, right? Cars get you from point A to B, but there are differences, right, in the kind of car you're driving. In the case of the spacesuits, the American spacesuit is more capable. It operates at a lower pressure. It's more flexible. My gloves were molded to my hands, so they fit very well. The helmet is detachable. It's got cutouts, so you have a lot of visibility. And so it's actually a more capable suit. However, because of the lower pressure, it's more complicated to get outside and do a spacewalk. You have to reduce the pressure in the spacesuit to a lower pressure so that you can actually move, right? Because you're working inside a balloon. So it does have more complications on preparing to go outside. The Russian spacesuit, on the other hand, is relatively simple, right? Operates a little bit of a higher pressure, but it's very simple. You do an in-suit oxygen pre-breathe, and you can open up the hatch or depressurize the airlock, open up the hatch, and go outside. Now, they only have 2 sizes of gloves, medium and large. And so you take the size that fits your hand the best, and you live with it, right? So both suits have their positives and their negatives. And both suits are very useful and do a great job. But if you have a lot of work to do and you have to do more precise work, the American suit would be the better one. All right, from Nico, how old were you when you applied to NASA? Well, I was 28 years old when I applied to NASA. And when I got selected, I was just a couple of months shy or about half a year shy of my 30th birthday. So I reported to Houston. I was still 29. About a month or so before my birthday, and so that's how old I was.
Dr. Chiao, this is Daniel.
Yeah.
I wanted to call your attention to some other great questions we have in the published tab. For example, we've got one from Treasure that says, "What kind of life do you think we'd find on Mars, if at all?"
Oh, you know what? I was on the wrong tab, wasn't I? Sorry about that. See, that's why we do these pilot program so we can learn. I should have been clicked on the published tab. I was on the new tab. So could you repeat that question?
Yeah, so the question was, what kind of life do you think we will find on Mars, if any at all?
Sure. Well, it's very exciting. Just in the last few years, we've had different probes that have returned some very exciting things. We've found basic building blocks of life here in our own solar system, on the moons of Saturn, and we believe also on the moon, some of the moons of Jupiter. We've seen evidence of big seas and lakes, billions of years ago on Mars. And very recently, the Curiosity rover discovered the presence of trapped methane in the sedimentary rock from billions of years ago. And that's important because it's just possible that methane was produced by something alive. Now, when I say alive, I mean microbial life, things that you would need a microscope to see. So I think hopefully we will find some pretty solid evidence that life existed on Mars, perhaps billions of years ago, and that would be in the form of basically these micro fossils, right? and we might be able to find evidence of some simple life forms that existed back then, or possibly even maybe a little more complex, where we could actually even someday perhaps find some kind of fossils. And so that's what I think we're going to discover on Mars. And the new Mars rover that's scheduled to be launched just in a few months, just this summer, it's going to arrive on Mars in February of 2021. They are going to set it down in the middle of what used to be a giant lake. And we're all very hopeful that it's going to find, hopefully, some pretty hard evidence of past life on Mars. All right, let's see. So where are we here on the published? Well, okay, from Aaron's. How can I be an astronaut when I grow up? I'm 5 years old, and what's the farthest planet you have ever seen? Well, the best thing you can do, Aaron's, no matter what you want to do, the formula, the recipe is the same. Do the very best you can in school, study hard, do the best you can in school, and do everything you can to take care of your health. And what I mean is, you know, getting enough sleep, eating a good diet, getting regular exercise. Those are all things that are going to give you the best chance for success, whether you want to be an astronaut or anything else. Okay, and farthest planet I've ever seen? Well, you know what? When we're up in space, we're not that much closer to the planets, right? So we're only about 280 miles closer, but it's a little more clear. We can see a lot more stars, they're brighter. And so, you know, certainly we can see planets like Mars, just like we can see them here in Venus, our nearest neighbors, Mars and Venus. But really everything else, well, even those planets look like stars. So from Taylor, where do you go to become an astronaut? Well, if you're an American, of course, you apply to NASA. And of course, NASA has since the late 1950s, or actually 1960, selected the first class. And so for, 60 years, that's been, the place to go. Things are changing a little bit because when Boeing launches their Starliner spacecraft, they're going to have a former NASA astronaut, Chris Ferguson, who works for Boeing. He will be on that flight. And then Boeing and SpaceX both have plans to recruit their own cadres of astronauts. So there are going to be more opportunities in the future. Okay, what else do we have? Let's see, from Linda France. As an elementary STEM educator, I talk to my students about teamwork a lot. As a project, they design mission patches to represent their collaboration. Which of your 5 mission patches is your favorite and why? Yeah, so mission patches can be a big deal, especially if you have a lot of first-time flyers together. Everybody has an opinion of what it should be. And unfortunately, sometimes you end up with a patch that has just got too much stuff in it to make everyone happy. And it doesn't really end up looking that nice. And so I'm pretty proud of all of patches of my missions because I was involved in the design of all of them. And, we relied heavily on a graphic artist, very talented graphic artist that does work for NASA named Sean Collins. And he designed every one of my patches, and they're all very clean and look very nice. And so my favorite, I would have to say, would be my last one, my space station mission, Expedition 10. He very cleverly used the American and the Russian flags and made a Roman numeral 10. And it's a nice, clean design, and that's my favorite. Okay, and then let's see, what else we have here from Capcom Conrad. What is your favorite space book or movie? You know what? My favorite movie is still 2001: A Space Odyssey, an oldie but goodie from the late 1960s. As far as books, I read a lot of, especially when I was younger, I read a lot of Asimov books and Arthur C. Clarke. So some of those science fiction books were my favorites for sure. Okay, and from Andre, on a long mission in the future, do you think there would ever be a need to make medicine, or would we need to take everything with us? That's a great question, Andre, because what we find is that medicines that we bring up to the space station have to be replaced more often than medicines here on the ground. That's because they're exposed to higher levels of radiation, and that can cause them to decompose more quickly. And so that's a really good question. What are we going to do about medicines when we have to, go on a longer flight, say to Mars or even beyond someday? What are we going to do? So that's an unsolved problem. We also have that question about food. The food we bring with us, is it going to be as nutritious in that, exposed to radiation for long periods of time and things like that? So those are all questions we have to figure out. Okay, looks like we have time for just a couple more. From Kelly Ahrens. Dr. Chiao, what was your most memorable moment for you during your missions in space? You know, probably the coolest moment I had was on my 3rd shuttle mission. We were the 2nd major assembly mission of the space station program, and we went up there, and I was the leader of the spacewalking team, and I was out on a spacewalk, and I had my boots locked into the robotic arm, and I was being maneuvered from one part of the station to another. And during, probably for about a minute during that transition, which is pretty slow, I was face down to the earth, and I couldn't see the space shuttle or the space station out of my peripheral vision. So I felt like a satellite flying over the earth, and that was really the coolest moments. Okay, we probably got time for one more here from Melissa Pore. Oh, looks like you're a ham operator. Good for you. Dr. Chiao, what do you think motivates students to continue working when they encounter obstacles in difficult subjects over and over again? Well, I can tell you from my personal experience, you know, you might look at me and think, well, you're an astronaut and everything was easy for you. You just didn't have to study and you got straight A's. And that's not true at all. In fact, nothing was farther from the truth. I worked really hard in school. When I got to university, suddenly I was surrounded by a lot of smart kids, and I was working harder than ever. And for the first time in my life, I started getting bad grades. You know, I got a C in my first quarter in physics, which was unheard of because math and science were always my strong subjects, right? And so that was a shock to me, and frankly, it was kind of tough for me the first couple of years at university. But, you know, I kind of got mad at myself because I said to myself, you know, you know, you're not a dumb guy. And so it's just a matter of working harder and not freaking out, right? So the subjects I had troubles with, the classes I was having problems with, I broke them down into smaller pieces, and I studied really hard until I understood all those pieces to put them back together, and I was able to get through those classes, you know, just fine. And so I did graduate from my undergraduate degree, which I still say from, you know, my undergraduate degree from Berkeley is still the single hardest thing I've ever done. But I did graduate not with an A+ average or even an A average. I graduated with a B+ average, and I'm very proud of that B+ average. So I think we're about out of time, but thank you all for coming and participating, and thanks for the great questions. I hope you enjoyed this. Please send us some feedback. We want to know what you thought of both parts, both the kind of the astronaut, a virtual astronaut visit, as well as kind of our program on you know, dealing with the isolation and little tips on how to stay motivated. All right, let's see. Let me hand this back to you then, Daniel. Thanks everyone, and good luck, and everyone hang in there, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Chiao. We really appreciate it. You know, we are excited to, you know, share these kind of opportunities to the world, and you know, we are very, very thankful for our collaboration in this, and we look forward to doing many more of these. And you know, thank you, all of you amazing educators and students that are out there listening to this right now. You know, there were fantastic, thoughtful questions that we're excited to keep bringing you answers to a lot of these the challenges of space exploration and of life. And like we said, Space Center Houston is about you know, is really about challenging the society to be true problem solvers. And you know, with the work with One Orbit and Leroy Chiao and Jamie, that we're excited that we got the opportunity to bring this to you. Again, I want you to check out all of our websites, spacecenter.org, oneorbitcdr.com. Those are great opportunities for us to collaborate and to look for opportunities in the future. So thank you very, very much for taking this time with us. You know, please provide us feedback. And again, thank you to Space Center Houston's National Network of Teachers for working very closely with us as we create these new opportunities to engage the public. Thank you very much. Have a great day.